So, I had an existential crisis reading a book about bacteria. So now I just want to sit and talk about what I loved about the book and why I find it inspiring. I feel like bacteria can really teach us a little bit about how to live life. My favorite quote, which I'm going to read out, is "Life is existence's celebration." Okay, I'm just gonna jump into the story of how it all happened. So, I was on the train reading a book, and the book is called Slanted Truths, written by Lynn Margulis, who is a biologist who I have been obsessed with for a while. And it's a book about the smallest, but also like the most toughest organism in the world, debatably. You know, like they were here before us, we are here because of them, and we're probably, they're probably gonna outlive us. So it also goes into how the Earth is a self-sustaining system, and this is brought in by the Gaia theory by James Lovelock. And then it also goes into how the Earth is probably gonna reproduce into space, and this is Margulis's theory. Super cool. And of course, she's very famous for her symbiotic theory. But yeah, it's basically about how evolution occurs through symbiotic relations and not just random mutations of the gene. And amongst reading about all of this, at one point I was questioning the meaning of my existence on a mundane commute to work. I came to an experience of just insignificance of being human. Like a very humbling down from the position of my humanness. Upon learning about bacteria and their critical role in evolution and like sustaining the planet and just the cycles of gases, just their role in just even in our daily lives, how we can't even survive without having other organisms in our guts to help us digest our food, and how the mitochondria is actually a result of symbiosis between two bacteria billions of years ago, and now they're in each of our cells and is the reason why we can do stuff, and we have energy because of the mitochondria. And that just blows my mind. We're probably more bacteria than what we call humanness, whatever that is. So yeah, that was a lot to take in and very fascinating to me as well. I was like, what do humans even do in their grandiosity? Like, we think humans think that we're so intelligent, so above everything, but like, is that really the case? Like, just take a look at bacteria. They're probably more intelligent than us, but obviously in a different way, and they're probably gonna outlive us. It was sort of like a wake-up call. Like, hey, you're not the peak of evolution. We even leave it to other organisms to handle our own waste. The pollution, the garbage, everything that we do, we create an excess of and rely on other creatures to take care of it, or nature to take care of it. Like, we're sort of like cancer on Earth, if you think about it. But we don't have to be. Like, all living systems have a recycling production, or like recycling system. Like, our cells themselves have their own systems of throwing away the waste and processing the waste. And if you look at other creatures, just the ecosystem, it's an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem because something is inputted and something is outputted, and then something happens with that output and it's turned into again an input. Like, it's a whole system, and I feel like we're just not in sync with it. We're just disrupting it even more. So it was a relationship that brought forth different species, is one major point that I got from her book. That's just turned tables for me. So learning about bacteria has really been a humbling experience. And I feel like we should all look at bacteria to humble ourselves. Sarcastically, she says, nearly everyone believes what our culture teaches. Evolution has clearly come to its final summit, namely man. The irony is that if a climate disaster were to hit planet Earth right now, we'd all probably die. We're just not at that stage yet. And I think the only ones that are probably gonna survive are these little creatures, bacteria. And they're gonna be thriving. I mean, of course, they die, but they're probably still gonna evolve and continue to outlive us. Because we're so stuck to our humanness, our idea of power, and our idea of grandiosity and achievement and intelligence. So I'm gonna read out a quote. Looking underwater, the oxygen bubbles, the waste of cyanobacteria, can be observed to be released, breaking towards the surface. In deserts, microorganisms, unlike humans, can survive for days, months, or even years. As soon as water comes, many types resume photosynthesizing. They convert sunlight into organic matter, leak oxygen, and form communities. These microscopic communities are relatively stable, unlike those formed by humans. She's just describing how bacteria function and how we do not, and how their waste is actually useful. It creates this whole system that keeps the planet going, that keeps the communities going, and other species going. So it's this interconnected network, and we're part of it, but we're not helping. We're not helping the network, if you know what I mean. So the next thing I want to talk about is quite a philosophical topic, and she actually delves into it in one of her chapters, and it is about the mind and body duality and how she tries to overcome that, or sort of solve that, give a perspective from a biological perspective. She says something unique about it by bringing the action of thinking into it. By bringing thinking into it, this is coming from still like a bacterial background, and I don't know, it's just a very interesting perspective that you don't usually hear in like a philosophy classroom, or just in general actually. She argues, saying that basically that the mind and body are unified, and thinking is physical. She says life from its onset has been capable of choice, of decision, of sensing and thinking from the beginning. Such thoughts, both vague and clear, are physical. To continue, thoughts are in the cells of our bodies and in those of other animals. In comprehending these sentences, certain ink squiggles trigger associations, the electrochemical connections of the brain cells. Glucose is chemically altered by reaction of its components with oxygen, and its breakdown products, water and carbon dioxide, enter tiny blood vessels. Sodium and calcium ions, pumped out, traffic across a neuron's membranes. As you remember, nerve cells bolster their new connections, new cell adhesion, proteins form, and heat dissipates. Thought, like life, is matter and energy in flux. The body is its complement. Thinking and being are aspects of the same physical organization and its action. And if one accepts that the fundamental continuity between body and mind, thought is essentially like all other physiology and behavior. Thinking, like excreting and ingesting, results from lively interactions of a being's chemistry. Even microbial thinking derives from cell hunger, movement, growth, association, programmed death, satisfaction, and other intrinsica of all life. If what is called thought results from such cell interactions, then perhaps communicating organisms, each themselves thinking can lead to a process greater than individual thought. So, what a mind-blowing thing to think about, ironically. I think what she's saying is quite relevant for new materialism, which is a philosophical movement that focuses on matter and materiality. By talking about the mind and the body being interrelated by thinking, a physical action, she does something interesting. Like she brings the dialogue not just relevant to humans, but to all life, at least lifelike systems like the cells or even the microorganisms that choose to act in certain ways as forms of thinking. So like if a bacteria decides to eat one species and then it decides not to eat another species, this in a way is a form of thinking. It's still choosing, it's saying no to something, and no matter the level of thinking, it's still a form of thinking. It also shows how current dialogue of thinking, mind and body revolves only around people and humans. She's taking thinking away from the abstract that sort of floats around into the body to reconceptualize what thinking is. How are our actions part of how the body thinks? So I think it's quite interesting to think about how thinking, body, and mind are, not distinct. I'm just here to share interesting facts. Whew. So the next thing I want to talk about is how she talks about how the earth is reproducing into space. When I came across this idea, I was very mind blown. This was probably the start of my crisis. So she talks about how the earth and the possibilities of earth reproducing into space. Like the earth is a biosphere, and so it's an enclosed thing that contains like living systems and like the ecosystem, right? So the earth is sort of like a biosphere. Sort of think about how we can have like a glass jar or like something enclosed with like plants and moss and I don't know, insects and stuff, and it can live on for years without opening the jar, giving oxygen or anything like that, because it's its own biosphere. Like it has its own system and cycle of the gases that are produced and the gases that are taken up, and how it goes around and around and around and around, and that's how it survives. Now think about the earth as that jar. Aren't we sort of in a very similar enclosed system? Thinking about how we're just this ball floating in space. It's kind of like that. It's like an enclosed system, right? And that's where life thrives, because we have the atmosphere and because we have the gases that have their own cycles, and we have oxygen and we have water. That's just how we live. And it's a scary thing. It's a scary thing to think about when you're thinking through the perspective of space. But it's also very fascinating. So, where do I lie between this existential crisis? Like I can't tell, like if it's cool, or if I'm just like falling off the edge of space, like it's a very in-between position to be in. Margulis says, life may not progress, but it expands. Earth life will have to evolve to live on other planets, or even perhaps around other suns, and if as humans we survive, we will certainly change, becoming part of the future supercosm, the hypothetical continued expansion of life from Earth into the solar system and beyond. She does have a very science fiction sort of language when she's talking about the future. Not that I'm complaining. So what she's saying is basically follows James Lovelock's Gaia theory, which is that the Earth is an autopoietic, self-sustaining system. The catch here is that we must be aware of how we understand Gaia. It is Earth not as a living being, but is more of a metaphor that it behaves as if it's alive. It's not like the earth itself is an organism, but it constitutes organism and it constitutes these cycles of life, making it seem as if earth itself is alive. But we shouldn't take it literally. And I feel like that's what happens with the New Age Gaia stuff, which I don't really know too much about, but we have to be cautious. I just wanted to flag it. So Margulis is very careful about metaphorizations that even happens like in scientific language, and that we need to actually be careful about, because that's when we confuse facts from metaphors. She believes that the biosphere is on the verge of reproduction and provides two reasonings. She believes there's a growing number of scientists and engineers involved in designing a variety of like self-sufficient or closed ecosystems in which life can thrive. And she adds that private and governmental space administrations in the Soviet Union, the US and Japan were also researching materially closed, perpetually recycling ecosystems. The second reason why she believes that the Earth may reproduce into space is that humanity is not special, but is a part of nature. For if we are part of it, part of Earth, so is our technology. And it is through technology that controlled environments bearing plants, human beings, animals, and microbes will soon be built in preparation for space travel and colonization. And she's referring to colonization of Mars in a chapter of hers. And so this is such a different language when you compare Elon Musk's, taking the rich to space or whatever, I don't know what it is, but it's going beyond that, because it's putting the basis of space travel is on how bacteria thrive and how other organisms thrive in those environments, in order for us to have an environment in which we can maybe possibly also live in. But that's just, we have to imagine, like, nothing is set in stone, but it's not like, oh, only people who can afford this much can go to space. Or it's not about, I'm gonna be the leader and take you to space. Like, I'm leading the next era for humanity. Like, it's none of that like egoism. It's more about curiosity, and also a caution with that curiosity, and how that it's actually possible, but not possible without other organisms. We're not gonna get there without them. She continues, in space, these dwellings will have to be sealed in glass and metal or other material so that life will be protected inside them. Such material isolation gives the recycling systems discrete physical boundaries, one of the best indications of true biological individuality. So Margulis thinks that if this were to be successful, then controlled ecosystems can be a powerful message on the need for cooperation between people and other organisms, because we have to live in a shared environment. And so I'm quoting her, and if perpetually recycling ecosystems can be erected and maintained, a whole new scientific discipline may arise from the possibility, for the first time ever, of comparing parent and offspring biospheres. So imagine the Earth actually being a mother, like literally a mother. Like if, she were to like pop out into space, not her, but one of hers pop out into space. Just funny. I'm mind blown again. But what does that even mean? Like, if I imagine, which I did, when I was reading on the train, millions of years ahead into the future, what would that mean for humans? If humans do survive, in how many ever years it will take for us to go into space until Earth reproduces, humans will also evolve in very different ways. We're probably not going to be the same way as we are now, which is a very scary thought, but also very exciting. I'm trying to be optimistic. I hope it's going to be good, because there's no other way. Like, if all other creatures go to space and they evolve to adapt to the climate there and, you know, form networks with each others in order to create an atmosphere or create a system in order to live there, like survive, that doesn't leave humans out. We can't recreate another Earth. So if we do go out in space, it's gonna be a completely different atmosphere, you know? What are humans gonna be like? And so Margulis does this in her book and also imagines like Earth maybe sort of, I don't exactly remember how it goes. I read it a few months ago, but she sort of imagines how if humans form symbiotic relations with algae or some other form of photosynthesizing species, then maybe we'd have, instead of hair, we'd have like photosynthesizing like algae, and we'd be like on the beach and just like absorbing all that food, and we wouldn't have to eat anymore. But you know, this is a possibility. Like, just you can be very creative with that, but it's quite terrifying to think about. You know, would you call them human? And why not? And so yeah, I'm again repeating, this is very different from like the capitalistic Elon Musk sort of I'm taking you to space idea. It's about, Margulis is saying that expanding into space is possibly not likely without other species, without organisms that play a huge role in self-sustaining ecosystems. We are not above the ecosystems, we're just part of it, and probably the worst part of it. If it is only the case that humans are going to go into space, that is a very selfish and egoistic thing to think about. I think it's also a very short-sighted dream. Like, only humans going to live on space. I don't know, doesn't sound right. So I think that prokaryotes, like bacteria, are more likely to do so first. I mean, in terms of colonizing space or other planets. And I don't like the word colonization, but I'm just gonna go with it for now. I say that because they were the ones that kickstarted life on Earth billions of years ago. It's because of then, you know, we had the eukaryotes, and then came the plants and the humans and the rest of the organisms. But it was the bacteria first. It was the only life that existed for billions of years. Billions of years ago, the atmosphere was flat. It was very flat and very low, and the only form of life that existed were these, you know, prokaryotes in their murking away. And then what happened was the atmosphere was lifted. This is how Margulis explains the atmosphere lifted. Life expands. It expands, and it went up, and it went up because the trees went up, and then the animals came, and it all happened because life went and life expanded. I think that's why she says life is gonna expand, and expand as in what's next, into space, is my understanding and interpretation. She says that evolution has not involved animals at all, and yet nearly all our studies of evolution are of animals. Fun fact. And she adds that productivity is bacterial, especially cyanobacterial, virtuously now, and it always has been. Ultimately, a nation's gross national product can only be biological, not industrial. And so this marks the end of my existential crisis. Here are some points that added to my crisis, but also I think helped me overcome it.